Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named American Horror Story, Season 2, Asylum. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a handsome man, Leo, taking photos of his girlfriend. They had ventured to one of America's top 12 haunted houses, the Briarcliff Asylum, a place that had confined many mentally ill patients under the guise of being a tuberculosis asylum. The actual number of deaths here was staggering, with tens of thousands unaccounted for and their true causes of death unknown. This shrouded the place in mystery, quickly turning it into a hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts. It was this allure that brought the couple here for an adventure, seeking to experience a different kind of thrill. The building was overgrown with weeds and covered in patches of decay, with young people's graffiti scattered across the walls. The most infamous monster here was the legendary Bloody Face Killer. Regardless of how crazy the killer was rumored to be, Leo now wanted to do something even crazier. He was about to get intimate with his girlfriend on an electrotherapy chair when they heard strange chicken noises from the next room. As young and full of vigor as they were, they decided to investigate. The girlfriend even encouraged Leo to reach his hand through the door to check it out. Overcome by temptation and armed with his phone, Leo extended his hand through the door. But within seconds, his hormone-let-go hand was ripped off. Time flashes back to the year 1964. Walker, a disrespected gas station attendant, finished work and prepared to head home, only to be surrounded by a group of so-called friends. This wasn't their first time causing trouble for Walker ever since he fell in love with his wife Alma, and his problems seemed to escalate. Back at home, fortunately, there was Alma to comfort him, using her words first but muscles later. 2 minutes later, their smelly hormone yoga session finished, and Walker lit a post-yoga cigarette, while the poor Alma had to get up to prepare dinner, feeling dissatisfied and wanting more. Walker was basking in the contentment of his wife's virtues when suddenly a blinding white light shone through the window. Fearing it was the gang coming back to hassle him, Walker grabbed a shotgun ready to drive them away, but the visitors were not human. Gazing at the celestial guests, Walker was stunned until Alma's cries for help snapped him back to reality. He ran back to check, but the room was in chaos. Alma had vanished, and objects around started to levitate strangely. Walker, too, couldn't resist the pull and found himself bound to the ceiling. Before losing consciousness, he glimpsed a terrifying monster approaching and touching him with unknown intent. The scene shifts to a journalist, Lana, who arrived at the Briarcliff Asylum, seeking to gather evidence and expose any dark practices within. A nun guided her up a spiral staircase and introduced her to the supervisor, a certain Sister Jude, who was seasoned and shrewd in her ways. Sister Jude clarified that their methods weren't about punishment, but redemption for patients like Shelley. After attending to her duties, Sister Jude shared the facility's progressive philosophies with Lana. However, Lana wasn't focused on that. Sister Jude could tell her intention. Just then, it's said that the serial killer known as Bloody Face was about to be brought in. As Lana followed Sister Jude, she saw the man, who was actually Walker, treated like a prisoner with calamine lotion doused on him before being tied to a bed. Sister Jude asserted her authority in the asylum and insulted his girlfriend. Walker's claims of aliens were deemed unbelievable by everyone. Instead, he was seen as a bloodthirsty killer who targeted women, including his missing wife Alma. Entering the lobby, Walker was first greeted by Shelley, whose flirtations he did not welcome. The noisy and unsightly patients around him made him extremely uncomfortable. He felt as though his death sentence had been declared. Annoyed, Walker tried to turn off the phonograph, but was stopped by a fellow patient named Grace. She warned that failure to follow instructions here led to punishment, having suffered for it herself. Despite this, a man soon confronted Walker, believing him responsible for killing Alma. In an era rife with racial discrimination, he wanted to seek revenge for her. The disturbance was quickly quelled by Sister Jude, and even though Walker pointed out the real culprit, he was knocked unconscious by her men and confined to solitary. Grace, who had previously been in solitary, brought Walker some food. She had more freedom than others since she volunteered to work in the kitchen. She believed Walker was not the murderer the outside world made him out to be, and not everyone here was mentally ill. Walker was about to have a meaningful conversation with someone who understood him when he noticed a guard approaching. Sister Jude observed that the body of a patient who had died the previous night had been dealt with in secrecy by the facility's doctor, named Arden. She disapproved of this mad scientist. Science and religion were always at odds, and ever since his arrival, patients had been dying silently every day. It was clear he was conducting human experiments. Dr. Arden believed that the age was no longer medieval but one controlled by science, and his science would bring more welfare than useless prayers. After exchanging some smelly bullshit with Arden, Sister Jude left in anger. She was not opposed to human experimentation, but keen to assert her dominance in this facility. The journalist Lana returned to her home, a love nest she shared with her lover. She believed that if she continued gathering evidence, the Pulitzer Prize would be hers. For now, her lesbian identity had to remain a secret. Any slip could result in her, despite her talent, being arrested. Sister Jude was dining with Father Howard. Beneath her austere exterior, a fiery heart lay hidden. She even fantasized about a carnal union with the priest. But in reality, Father Howard had no such desires and instead urged Jude to continue supporting the doctor's work. Late at night, a nun carrying buckets of meat approached the monstrous creatures kept by the doctor. She dropped the meat and fled on her Tesla legs, only to run into Lana, who was lying in wait. Lana thought she had caught them red-handed, but the nun quickly whisked her away from the scene. Back inside the asylum, Lana coerced the nun into showing her around by threatening not to expose Sister Jude. Along the way, Lana witnessed famished male prisoners and a sex addict engaging in acts with the guard. The patients' lives here were an eye-opener for her as a journalist, but for a major news story, something was still lacking. Just then, she was drawn to Dr. Arden's execution room. Inside, the doctor was conducting research on Walker, a once-in-a-century murderer whose brain might reveal the nature of human criminality. The doctor's cold fingers reminded Walker of a previous close encounter with the aliens, and from beneath the skin of his neck, Arden extracted a chip. This integrated circuit was clearly not from their era, and even more bizarrely, it transformed into a butterfly and flew away. The next day, Sister Jude did not punish the nun who leaked information. Compared to catching Lana, the nun's mistake was trivial. Jude had already approached Lana's lover, threatening to destroy her career unless she signed a statement. This document would be enough to confine Lana to the asylum for life. After dealing with the journalist, Sister Jude noticed that Dr. Arden was up to something new. It seemed he was clearing out a room for a new plaything. She understood that whatever the madman was doing was surely to satisfy his sadistic whims. The scene shifts back to present day. The girlfriend, unable to drag the severely injured Leo, had to go downstairs to grab a cell phone. As she returned, the legendary bloody face actually appeared before her eyes. She frantically fled to her boyfriend's side, but Leo was already on his last breath. She had no choice but to abandon him and hide in a room. Bloodyface, after giving Leo his death blow, began charging at the door. Time once again reverted to 1964. The knocking at the door snapped Lana's lover from her reverie. She was in the midst of plotting a rescue strategy for Lana with a few friends. Bloodyface had been locked away at Briarcliff Asylum, and Lana's safety was hanging by a thread. As a friend opened the door, it was only some children asking for Halloween candy. They reassured Lana's lover, who resolved to confront the nuns at the asylum first thing the next morning. After seeing her friends out, Lana's lover was about to turn off the lights and go to bed when the real Bloodyface suddenly sprung out from behind a curtain. Her pleas for mercy were in vain as she met a grisly end. Lana was rudely awoken before she could settle into a peaceful sleep. Room checks were a daily routine here, searching for contraband and the like. Sister Jude advocated for the patient's welfare, but insisted on stricter rules to manage them. Lana threatened Jude, claiming her editor knew she was here to dig up a major story. Sister Jude was unfazed by the journalist's threat, mocking her for what she deemed naive talent. However, Jude turned around and went to see Dr. Arden. The best way to silence the journalist was to make her forget, and the doctor's previous electroshock therapy seemed suitable. Dr. Arden was surprised that Jude would agree to the use of electroshock, but she simply considered it one of God's tools. Lana was soon strapped to the bed. Jude felt a pang of pity watching her struggle, but at the doctor's urging, she personally connected Lana to the electrotherapy machine. Lana's veins bulged, and her eyes rolled back as the current surged through her. Meanwhile, a psychiatric expert named Oliver was sent to the asylum by the local court in order to determine whether Walker was truly mentally ill, a verdict that would affect Walker's fate. Walker was well aware of Oliver's purpose and tried to appear logically coherent, but Oliver diagnosed him with acute psychosis anyway. Elsewhere, the nun came to feed the doctor's monstrous creatures, a part of her deal with Dr. Arden. As a reward, the doctor gave her something that went against her nun's vows. Hesitant at first, the nun looked at the candy apple in his hand but took a bite with the doctor's encouragement. Their actions were clearly observed by Shelley from upstairs. Lana was still pondering ways to escape when she noticed there seemed to be two sane individuals, especially Walker, who also wanted to get out. Despite Grace's advice not to entertain such fantasies, Walker indeed had a plan to escape. Oliver sought out Sister Jude. Since his arrival, he had witnessed many shocking things. Oliver advocated for the patients to receive proper treatment, but Jude reminded him to stick to his job and not meddle in the affairs of the asylum. During their conversation, Jude met with a couple who wanted to admit their crazy son. Oliver barged in too, and Jude, not wanting to cause a scene in front of the parents, allowed him to sit in. It's revealed that the visitor's son had started spouting nonsense and saying things they couldn't understand. One morning, they even found their crazy son had consumed the heart of their cow in a ghastly manner. Oliver immediately took an interest in the patient. Upon meeting the crazy man, they found him behaving as oddly as his parents had described, as if possessed. Oliver wanted to begin treatment right away, but Sister Jude intervened. Elsewhere, Lana and Grace were undergoing sauna treatment within the institution when Grace suddenly pulled out a blade and dashed out of the tub, taking the opportunity to also free Lana. Lana had taken a liking to this woman and confided in Grace about her desire to escape. Grace didn't object, but thought Lana was indulging in a pipe dream. Lana laid out her detailed escape plan, asserting that she would take Walker with her. Both having been betrayed by friends, Grace began to feel a glimmer of hope for escaping. Shelley took the initiative to see the doctor, mistaking the doctor's earlier interaction with the nun as flirtation. But Dr. Arden had no interest in this promiscuous addict. Shelley recounted her dire experiences before being admitted, yet the doctor remained unmoved. Meanwhile, the crazy man's condition was worsening. Oliver recommended taking him to the county hospital for treatment, but Father Howard had already brought their witch doctor to the facility, believing there was no need for modern medicine, only an exorcism ritual. As a professional, Father Howard demanded Oliver's attendance at the ceremony. Given the current situation, the bishop didn't want outsiders witnessing the events, so all patients were ushered back to their rooms. Lana continued to record the tunnel escape route on paper, but Walker noticed first and tucked the note away. Thanks to his quick thinking, their escape plan remained undiscovered. Dr. Arden called a prostitute to his house, who thought it was just a standard transaction, but his intentions were elsewhere. He turned on music and prepared a lavish feast. Although the prostitute didn't understand high society, Arden didn't care. He just needed a listener. Meanwhile, in the ward, the witch doctor and father were gesturing with crosses and chanting prayers, but none of these tricks could shake the crazy man. His pulse grew weaker, yet his body became more agitated. He even sent the witch doctor flying through the air. As the scene became unmanageable, Father Howard hastily retreated and called for Sister Jude. Although women were not allowed at the previous ceremony, now he only wanted Jude to stabilize the crazy man who appeared to be in immense pain. Just as Jude attempted to help, she was repelled by his venomous words. As the crazy man lay on the bed, he recited Sister Jude's life story. Jude aspired to be the most powerful nun, but her lascivious nature held her back. Even the soldiers she had seduced rejected her for being too old, and she had a hit-and-run accident on her way home once. Each night she fantasized about Father Howard. Enraged and embarrassed, Jude wanted to strike him but was pulled away by the arriving father. The crazy man's will even began to influence reality, and all the cell doors opened. Seeing the opportunity, Walker and two others prepared to escape, but Lana refused to take the murderer with her. She only wanted to be with Grace. However, Grace insisted on escaping with Walker. Watching the woman she liked leaving her once again, Lana helplessly reported the two. The crazy man became increasingly frenzied. There was no time left for prayers. Oliver directly administered a sedative to him. Under the influence of the medication, his breathing quickly deteriorated. With his last breath, he transferred the evil spirit into the nun opposite him and then passed away. On the other side, at Arden's house, the prostitute was dressing up as a nun as requested, but she accidentally knocked over a box. Inside the box, to her horror, were photos that Arden had taken of his trophies. It turned out the doctor was the real infamous Bloody Face, a murderer of women. Arden then dropped all pretenses, attempting to force himself upon her, but the quick-thinking prostitute kicked him away and escaped the room. The next day, Dr. Arden visited the possessed nun who had fainted. He harbored sinister thoughts towards this defenseless woman. But in the asylum, he still had to maintain the facade of a gentleman. The nun named Mary is unaware of his evil nature and expresses feeling safe with his muscles around. The doctor hypocritically commented that human bodies were no different from machines in his eyes. Elsewhere, Sister Jude rewarded Lana for informing on Grace and Walker, who were now facing punishment. Lana was allowed to watch. Walker, unable to bear seeing Grace suffer, took the blame upon himself and ended up receiving 40 lashes. The scene then cuts back to the present. Bloodyface opened the door, knife in hand, ready to kill Leo's girlfriend. But Leo tackled him from behind, allowing his girl to stab the killer several times, intending to escape back to the car with Leo. However, another Bloodyface appeared in the hallway, and the two were attacked from both sides and had their phone call cut off. It turns out these two were criminals leveraging the notoriety of Bloodyface, but they were unlucky today because the real culprit appeared before them. In the flashback, Sister Mary, the second in command of the asylum and Jude's assistant, handed Jude the letters from her mailbox. In the letters, Jude saw a news article about the victim girl she had once hit in a hit-and-run accident. This old news threw Jude into a panic, but Mary reassured her that these letters were just brought by the postman. Jude was deeply troubled all day, needing dough when Oliver walked in. He had only been there for 2 weeks, but had a strong sense of responsibility. He urged Jude to stop the corporal punishment of patients and try more compassion. Jude, however, believed she was already humane enough. She even arranged for the patients to watch movies on stormy nights. Oliver, detecting something off in Jude's agitated tone, realized she was hiding something. Frustrated, Jude blurted out the incident with the newspaper. Knowing she would say no more, Oliver dropped the matter. Sister Mary announced to everyone the plans for movie night on Friday. Walker saw it as a golden opportunity to escape. Just then, a guard came to take Walker away. Dr. Arden wanted to see him. Jude was listening to reports from a subordinate who was monitoring Oliver, hoping to catch something that could be used to get rid of him ahead of time. At that moment, Mary barged in, claiming that she had seen someone drinking the communion wine. Using the inspection of the wine for dilution as a pretext, Mary poured herself a glass right in front of Jude. Jude, struggling to resist her urge to drink, only then noticed that Mary had put on lipstick. Mary claimed the lipstick was a gift from the doctor to Jude and that she was merely trying it out. Jude wiped off the lipstick and pushed Mary's heavy body out of the room. Once again, Walker was strapped to the bed for an examination. Dr. Arden had studied the mechanical bug and believed that someone had planted it on Walker. The possessed Mary noticed that the most devout Christian among the patients was the only one who could see through her true nature. Even though this patient recognized her as none other than Satan, no one believed her bullshit because she gossiped daily. Mary knocked away her cross. Chants and prayers to the cross were futile against her, especially now that she had found an excellent new host. Mary looked at the believer with some pity before killing her with scissors and feeding her body to the monsters the doctor kept. She then reported the situation to him. Dr. Arden praised her compassion, but Mary pointed out his truly evil intentions. She tried to seduce him, but he wasn't interested in her heavy body. The doctor yearned to defile pure girls, and now that Mary had fallen from grace, he found her repulsive. Mary, unsuccessful in her seduction, was thrown out of the room, but she believed that she had already disturbed the old man's peace of mind. Oliver was instructing the patients on how to build a viewing stand when Lana secretly approached him to ask if he could pass a message to a friend on the outside. Oliver readily agreed to her request and tucked the note she gave him into his pocket. Shelley and the other patients were making bread for the evening. Shelley approached Grace, wanting to join them in their escape plan. She believed that if they could just reach Progressive France, she would no longer be a criminal. Whether Walker helped or not, having company in escape was better. Grace smiled and tacitly agreed to Shelley joining them. As the storm approached, Arden decided to spend the night in the asylum. Jude confronted him, convinced that the newspaper and lipstick were his tricks to make her slip up and seize power for himself. The doctor was speechless at her delusions. He was more concerned about Mary's fall from grace. With no outlet for her rage, Jude turned and left. Seeing her chance, Mary made a call to Jude in the name of the victim girl she hit. Jude's defense crumbled in that moment. When she saw the shattered glasses of that girl on the table, Jude could no longer bear it. Trembling, she reached for the glass of wine. The movie was about to begin. Jude blew her whistle to organize the patients into their seats. The story screening today was about a man's licentious tales. Outside, thunder roared and lightning flashed. To soothe the restless patients, Jude recited lyrics from her days as a resident singer. But as she continued, memories of a past car accident haunted her. Using the excuse of looking for a Mexican, Jude hastily left the auditorium. Walker and 2 others took the opportunity to slip away as well. The guard, engrossed in the movie, turned a blind eye. Lana learned of her lover's fate from Oliver, who said that he had visited her home but found it empty. The bloodstains on the floor and the open window suggested that Lana's lover might be in trouble. Lana couldn't accept this news. She looked to the three who had already sneaked out of the screening room and resolved to escape with them. Grace was suspicious of Lana, who had just joined them, especially since Lana had betrayed them once before. But Lana was too concerned with her lover's situation to care. Walker understood Lana and convinced Grace to trust her. However, the guard was patrolling the opposite corridor. Shelley took a risk to buy time for the others. As long as Lana could escape and write an exposé that could destroy this place, she too might regain her freedom in the future. Amidst deafening thunder, Dr. Arden lost his sanity. He pulled out a tube of lipstick and smeared it on the Madonna statue in the lobby, defiling it. The statue no longer held any semblance of divinity. He then pushed it over, shattering it on the floor. Hearing the commotion, Jude went to investigate, but instead came face to face with a green-skinned monster. Shelley stopped when she felt the time was right, pushing the guard over, causing him to hit his head and pass out. As Shelley was about to rejoin her companions, Arden blocked her way. Walker, waiting in the corridor, didn't see Shelley arrive and deduced she must have met with misfortune. The trio decided to leave Shelley behind and come back for her after Lana had escaped. They ran out of the corridor into the woods outside. If they traveled a few kilometers north, they would return to human society. Inside the compound, Oliver realized that Lana had been missing for a long time. He reported the situation to the security head, who became frantic upon discovering that 3 people were missing. He had no choice but to inform Mary, who was absorbed in the film. Meanwhile, Shelley was taken back to her room by the doctor, who intended to vent his lusts there, even though she was a woman he had previously despised. For the first time, Shelley resisted the sexual advances. In the woods, the trio found that this was not the escape shortcut they had hoped for. Instead, they encountered many terrifying monsters, and the missing Mexican had become their prey. The 3 had no choice but to flee back into the asylum. By the time Jude became aware of the escapees, the trio had already returned to their seats. Shelley awoke on the operating table, begging Dr. Arden to let her go back, promising to keep silent about everything. But he made it clear that there was no chance for Shelley, revealing her legs had been sawn off. That day, the asylum received a new Jewish patient who had lashed out and hurt someone simply because of some racist comments in a tavern. It was evident she harbored deep resentment for the crimes committed by Nazis. The doctor then injected Shelley with a drug, leading everyone to believe she had escaped and disappeared, which meant he could do as he pleased with her, just like with past patients. Grace was helping in the kitchen as usual when Walker entered with a new scar on his lip. Here, they were treated like commodities by the administrators, and Walker was frequently taken by the doctor for research. This time, he had been cut several times simply because he couldn't find the mechanical bug. Grace sympathized with Walker and was willing to believe his story of being an extraterrestrial, given her own equally bizarre past. It turns out that one night, Grace heard noises from the attic and discovered her father being murdered by her stepsister's boyfriend. They secretly killed the stepmother as well and accused Grace to the police. Their plan was seamless, gaining her father's farm and sending Grace to this place. Grace longed for the days on the farm, and Walker promised that one day they would escape again. On movie night, Jude didn't notice the 3 who had gone out and returned, but Oliver did. He valued Lana greatly, believing her to be a sane person who shouldn't be trapped there. Oliver saw himself in Lana. They were both talented individuals. He promised to help her leave if she was willing to cooperate, but they had only about a week's time. The new Jewish arrival had no choice but to write to a good friend. Of course, the letter would never be sent. It only served to remind her of her ordeal in the concentration camp, a place as maddening as the hell she was in now. Lana reminded her to put away her pen and paper, as they were contraband here. At that moment, Dr. Arden entered the room. The Jewish woman recognized this devil at a glance. She quickly approached the doctor and exposed his identity. It turns out Arden was one of the doctors from the concentration camp, and the Jewish woman was none other than Anne, the author of the diary. Jude met with the Jewish woman but couldn't believe that the Anne from the story had survived to this day. Anne, equally incredulous, couldn't fathom that the war criminal who should have been sentenced was now practicing as a doctor here. When Anne first saw Arden, he was a member of the Nazi SS. He always looked amiable, often bringing food to the children, and the guards didn't dare beat them in his presence. But every now and then, Arden would take one of the girls away, and when she returned, she was a picture of torture and mutilation. Anne's descriptions were vivid, but Jude just thought she was making up stories. On the other side, Oliver viewed Walker in much the same way. He knew Walker was just an ordinary man who had erred under social pressure. The problem was, admitting Walker was not sick would result in his immediate execution. Oliver wanted to help Walker escape. He promised to lie for Walker in court, but at the same time, Walker had to confront his past. Oliver concocted a plausible story, saying Walker had not seen aliens. Initially, he indeed loved Alma, but soon that love turned to humiliation under the weight of rumor and gossip. It was this humiliation that twisted Walker, turning him into a serial killer. Anne showed Jude the numbers tattooed on her arm, proof that she indeed came from the concentration camp, while no one knew the true background of Dr. Arden. In the asylum, patients had to take their medication daily. Lana, under the continuous medication, began to experience hallucinations. She even believed she had exposed the crimes of that place and won the Pulitzer Prize. The line between reality and illusion blurred in her eyes, causing her immense pain. She decided to agree to cooperate with Oliver's treatment. Walker was venting his frustration on the dough in the kitchen when Grace approached to inquire about his situation. Walker had been resolute about escaping, but now he was confused. If he was indeed delusional, truly a murderer, then he had no right to face the genuinely innocent Grace. Grace comforted him, saying that self-doubt is a sign of the lucid, but Walker wanted to know how Grace really saw him. Grace's answer was that she didn't care. No matter what, she would stand by Walker's side. Her words moved Walker, and they kissed without using their tongues. But their passionate act was caught by a guard, and they were immediately taken to Jude. Jude decided to take them for sterilization, but just then, the security head burst in, informing Jude that 2 police officers were looking for Dr. Arden. Jude left hastily, and Mary suggested that she handle the sterilization, instructing the security head to take Grace away while she placed a stack of files in front of Walker. Jude met with the 2 detectives, who had been tipped off by a prostitute who suspected Dr. Arden was involved in several murder cases. Moreover, the woman accused him after finding a Nazi badge in a box. Knowing he was at fault, Arden blustered a few words about being slandered before hurrying off. The police were now targeting Arden since, as a doctor, he fit the profile of the perpetrator more than an ordinary person would. Oliver was administering aversion therapy to Lana, using induced vomiting while she looked at pictures of women to help her overcome her same-sex attraction. After increasing the medication dosage, Lana couldn't help but throw up while looking at a photo of her lover. Jude sought out the priest and laid out everything about the police looking for Dr. Arden and supported it with Anne's statements. However, the priest believed Jude was just jealous of Arden and was slandering him to seize control of the asylum. He also thought her judgment was impaired due to her alcoholism. Stung by his words and feeling disgraced, Jude left. The priest immediately called Arden, advising him to take care of unfinished business, referring to Shelley, who had become disabled. Jude then approached the dean, walking through the ruins after a storm, seeking answers to her confusion. Without a doubt, Arden was problematic, but now her beloved priest was defending him, leaving her uncertain about what to do. The dean reminded Jude that she had beaten her alcoholism through her own will, not the priest's help. Now, she needed to see the situation clearly and find her own path. Walker was taken back to his cell, with Grace in the one next to him. Walker confronted Grace, asking why she had deceived him. The documents revealed that it was Grace who had killed her own parents. Grace then confessed the truth. As a child, her father would visit her room to assault her, and her stepmother, knowing all this, did not protect her but told her to keep quiet. Unable to bear it any longer, Grace eventually killed them both. That was the harsh truth Walker had sought. As always, Lana stared blankly at the other patients. Oliver approached, bringing her a photo of her lover and promising that no matter what happened, he would take Lana away on Friday. Walker requested a meeting with Jude to confess his sins. Only God knew whether he had actually committed the acts he was accused of, and so he should submit to God's will. Jude was pleased with his enlightenment. On the other side, Arden approached Anne to silence her, but she pulled out a handgun she had previously taken from the police. After shooting Arden in the leg and obtaining the keys, she discovered the disfigured Shelley behind the door. Following the dean's advice, Jude visited an old investigator who, like Anne, bore a similar number tattooed on his arm. He, too, was a victim of the concentration camps. The investigator reminded Jude that Nazis were marked with blood-type tattoos, making it easy for the Allied forces to identify them after the war. He cautioned her against acting rashly, warning of the unknown consequences of provoking a true Nazi. Anne forced Arden at gunpoint to Jude's office. However, Sister Mary was the only one there and fled in a panic. Anne decided to execute Arden on the spot, but was quickly overpowered when another gun was pressed against her head. She was sedated and bound to a bed. When she awoke, Sister Jude was beside her, explaining that Arden was not dead but had been taken to the hospital. Jude needed to know what Anne had witnessed to secure a better outcome for them both. Anne spoke of seeing a limbless creature, but Jude had already searched Arden's execution room and found nothing. Just then, Mary arrived, reporting a man visiting the asylum looking for his wife. Jude met with the man named Brown, who produced a family photo showing his wife, Anne, whose real name was Charlotte. Brown explained that his wife became irritable and depressed after giving birth. Following a movie featuring Anne, she began to fantasize that she was Anne, carving numbers into her arm and neglecting their child. Brown sincerely hoped for his wife's return. Anne came downstairs, vehemently disagreeing with Brown's story, suspecting that he just wanted to trick her into leaving, thus sparing Arden. However, the photo in Brown's hand triggered memories in Anne, and the images in her mind began to align with the man before her. She returned to herself and chose to go home with Brown. As they departed, Oliver reminded Jude that she had made a grave mistake. Jude was aware, but she herself did not know how to rectify the blunder. Locked in solitary, Grace and Walker shared their states of mind, understanding each other even though they were both slated for sterilization soon. But at that moment, they were in sync. Walker's cell door opened, and Mary entered. Walker thought his surgery was imminent, but Mary informed him that Sister Jude had decided to spare him thanks to his sincere repentance, and Grace would be forgiven as well. After Walker was led away, Mary's demeanor shifted, and she mockingly informed Grace that her surgery would proceed. The news was a bolt from the blue, plunging Grace into despair. She screamed in frenzy, but no one could help her until a dazzling white light appeared in front of her cell, searing itself into Grace's eyes. Lana finished her medication expressionlessly and then wandered to the window to gaze out absent-mindedly. How long had these days been going on? Her body felt like it was about to give in, yet she swiftly adapted to this place. But Oliver hadn't forgotten the promise he made to her. He instructed Lana to wait for him beside the staircase 6 hours later. They would leave this place together. However, before departing, Oliver had another task to complete. Walker pleaded with Oliver to save Grace, but Oliver was only responsible for Walker's case at the moment. He comforted Walker by asking him to follow the plan for now, promising to find an opportunity to stop Grace's surgery later. Oliver's proposed therapy was straightforward. He turned on a tape recorder and had Walker confess to killing his wife, Alma. Oliver assured him that by listening to the playback, perhaps Walker would recall his true memories. Oliver promised this would keep him off the electric chair. Walker complied, and as he recounted his story, details of his wife's murder began to emerge in his mind. But it was all set against a stark white space where Alma appeared helpless. Jude left a message in her office for the investigator, telling him to stop investigating anything related to Arden. Just then, Arden walked in. He seemed to have anticipated Jude's actions. Arden, despite his injured leg, had gained an absolute advantage over Jude. He threatened her to either kneel and apologize, or he would report her to the bishop and have her dismissed. With those words, Arden returned to his office. He was preparing to change the dressing on his wound when Mary walked in. Arden was embarrassed and tried to get up to leave, but Mary stopped him and brought antiseptic and fresh bandages. She tenderly changed his bandages and apologized for her irrational behavior on the stormy night. Dr. Arden had already forgiven her. After all, the creature Shelley in the lab had been dealt with by Mary. Jude would eventually be driven out, and Mary hoped that when the time came, she could co-manage the asylum with Arden. In the neighborhood playground, children were playing joyfully. A little girl by the staircase spotted a monster, and the parents were horrified when they saw it too. That monster was Shelley, who had escaped from the woods. On the other side, Brown had once again brought his wife back to the asylum. He had thought that after his wife returned, she would be a good mother, but she not only failed to do so, she even attempted to strangle their child. Shocked and scared, Brown had no choice but to commit his wife for treatment, and the psychiatric expert Oliver he saw that day seemed appropriate for the job. Jude had no choice but to ask the security head to call Oliver for help. Lana waited anxiously by the staircase, and as promised, Oliver appeared on time. He provided cover for Lana, and the two of them successfully escaped to the outside. The security head called out for Oliver, wanting him to come back, but the escaped Oliver stated that he no longer worked there and would not be returning. So the responsibility to treat Brown's wife was bestowed upon Dr. Arden, who took to the task with eagerness. He mulled over the immediate execution of a frontal lobotomy, assuring Brown that his wife would return to normal by the following day. The security head reported Lana's disappearance to Jude, who was already in despair, facing her impending dismissal and feeling detached from everything at the asylum. The security head provided comfort to Jude, who then shed her nun's habit for her old clothes and headed to a bar. There, she sat at the counter and soon engaged in conversation with a man who approached her, indulging herself for the first time in years. Oliver brought Lana back to his house, explaining that they would go to the police station the next day to submit all the evidence. He poured Lana a glass of wine, but as she sat down hurriedly and turned on the table lamp, she noticed the lampshade looked peculiar. Oliver handed her some mints in a container that eerily resembled a skull, sending a chill down her spine. She excused herself to the restroom to leave the hall, but found none of the doors in the corridor would open. By mistake, she stumbled into a storage room where Oliver followed and pressed a button, causing Lana to fall into a dark chamber below. When Lana woke up again, she was bound hand and foot, her lover lying beside her with her face skinned, revealing that Oliver was the bloody face who kidnapped her lover. Oliver's approach, still suave, only intensified Lana's terror. In the asylum, Walker was shocked to find Grace bleeding profusely and couldn't understand why she had been operated on. Just then, 2 police officers arrived to arrest Walker based on Oliver's testimony. Before being taken away, Grace revealed to Walker that Alma was not dead, as she had seen her. Elsewhere, Brown and his wife returned to a peaceful life. The wife was somewhat dull after the brain surgery, but otherwise just as Brown had hoped. He threw away his wife's old junk, oblivious to the fact that the doctor who had operated on his wife was standing next to a photograph of Hitler. The scene shifts to a lady arriving at the asylum with her daughter, Jenny, seeking the aid of Sister Jude. She was troubled by her child's odd demeanor. Jenny had never cried, not even as a baby. She possessed an unnerving calmness, more so than any other child. Eerier still, even more than most adults. One day, Jenny went out with the only classmate willing to play with her, but later, only Jenny returned. Now the lady was overwhelmed by the accident and left her daughter Jenny at the asylum. Lana woke up in a warm bed to a beautiful morning, even the scent of toasted bread wafting through the air. But this was not her own home. This was Oliver's slaughter basement. Oliver was delighted to see Lana awake, handing her breakfast and informing her that he had taken care of her lover. Lana shakily took the bread, eating as tears streamed down her face, yet she managed to thank Oliver. He confessed that Lana was the woman he had been searching for all along. Since being abandoned by his mother in his youth and growing up untouched in an orphanage, he had been well educated, but always felt a void where maternal love should have been. It wasn't until a dissection class in college that the seed of his regret bore twisted fruit. Facing the cadaver on the table that resembled his mother, he felt an affection and embraced the cold body. However, the smell of formaldehyde and the corpse's rigid touch snapped him back to reality. Oliver yearned for something more real, a warmer substitute. For the previous victims, Oliver had merely skinned them, but Lana was the perfect model he had envisioned. From now on, Lana was to be his mother. Inside the asylum, the investigator called Sister Jude to inform her that Anne was merely a figment of a patient's imagination and that there was no need to investigate further. However, the investigator revealed to Jude that the patient's delusions were accurate. He revealed that after Arden's escape from a concentration camp, he had forged a new identity and gone to work for the Red Cross. The investigator had Arden's file but needed more direct evidence to prosecute the psychopathic doctor officially. Afterward, Father Howard rushed to the city hospital, where the doctors were glad for his arrival. They were at a loss with the monster born in the city. Other priests, frightened by the creature's appearance, dared not approach. Only Howard was there to offer the patient last rites. Upon the first look, he recognized the monster as Shelley. In the flashback, Howard met Dr. Arden 2 years ago at a tuberculosis asylum run by the Red Cross, including treatments for tuberculosis. As his work was nearing completion without formal human clinical trials, Arden's ideas had resonated with Howard, and they quickly agreed to establish the Briarcliff Asylum. But now, faced with the unrecognizable Shelley, Father Howard began to doubt if Arden had forgotten their original mission. In anger, he confronted Arden later, demanding he cease all research. Arden revealed he had discovered a new treatment method, injecting patients with a mixture of syphilis and tuberculosis bacteria. Though they would become monsters, they could resist nuclear radiation. Arden proudly called this purification. After much consideration, Howard chose to tolerate it. Jenny was chopping vegetables in the kitchen with Sister Mary, who cautioned her not to hide her desires. The so-called good children of God were just constraints created by adults. Recalling the memories of the body she inhabited, the possessed Mary reflected on the bullying the poor nun had endured and told Jenny she was talented and shouldn't let adults hold her back. Howard approached Sister Jude, suggesting she take a position elsewhere, as a juvenile detention center was in need of staff. Jude understood this to mean she was being dismissed. Despite her reluctance, the priest insisted she pack up and leave immediately. After changing, Jude was approached by Mary for a farewell. Jude couldn't imagine what Mary would do after she left and asked for her treasured red wine to get drunk one last time. Walker seized an opportunity in prison to call Oliver. Initially, Oliver pretended to be innocent, but when Walker exposed his lies, he flew into a rage. He wouldn't allow anyone to defame him. Lana, overhearing Oliver on the phone, prepared to escape. She exerted all her strength to pry open a ring on her shackles with an iron rod. Oliver stormed in, furious. Though Lana had quickly returned to the bed, he noticed the sweat on her face and her rapid pulse. Seeing the broken shackles, he flew into a rage, realizing she was no different from those of the other kidnapped women. So he put on his bloody face mask, ready to execute her. Mary slipped into Jude's red lingerie, primped and preened to the nines, and wreaked havoc in Jude's office. Worse still, when the investigator called Jude, Mary answered the phone. Jude, carrying a fine wine, entered the doctor's office, intending to bid farewell to Arden. Despite the woman before him thwarting his efforts at every turn, that obstacle would no longer be an issue. With this thought, Arden gladly accepted her glass of wine. The investigator opened the door, only to find a blonde nun outside. He mistook Mary for someone sent by Jude, but in reality, she was after his life. Meanwhile, Jude rushed to the hotel with a fingerprint-laden glass, eager to prove Arden's crimes. But by the time she arrived, the investigator's throat had been slit, and he was lying in the bathroom, barely alive. Mary, having gathered all the evidence, returned to the asylum and handed it to Dr. Arden, except for the fingerprint. Arden couldn't understand why Mary kept protecting him, a mere old man whose work was always hidden in the shadows. Mary surely had her own agenda and demanded only one thing of him: absolute trust in her. Under Mary's spell, Jenny repeated her old ways, this time killing her own mother. Elsewhere, Bloodyface straddled Lana, filled with disappointment tinged with heartache. He had been so full of hope for Lana before he entered the asylum, drawn to her strong, talented nature, which is why he chose her to be his surrogate mother. Now, Lana could only tenderly console him, using her words but not muscles. Bloodyface removed his mask, revealing himself as Oliver once more. The scene shifts back to the present, where police in the asylum find 3 people hanged, imposters of Bloodyface. From a phone lost by Leo, the police receive a call from the real owner, saying that Leo's girlfriend is imprisoned by him. At dawn in the asylum, the nuns bustle about. One discovers that Grace has a high fever and is bleeding profusely. In her delirium, Grace sees death beckoning to her. She reaches out, wanting to be taken to its domain, but a nun's forceful hit snaps her back to reality. Mary reports Grace's condition to Arden, who insists he never performed any sterilization surgery. Mary is skeptical because Grace's uterus has been removed, a feat only Arden could achieve. The doctor is annoyed by Mary's baseless accusations. He attempts to remind her who's in charge of the asylum, but with a wave of her hand, she sends him flying like an old bird. Then, the Satan-possessed Mary declares herself the one in charge. Elsewhere, a patient working in the kitchen hears a voice tempting him, leading him to put his arm in the slicer. Mary arrives to find a message written in blood in an ancient language, a name signifying a summoning ritual, the purpose and success of which she does not yet know. The patient is sent to the ward at night, confessing to the security head that he no longer wishes to be in this world, having seen death and accepted death's kiss. The Satan-possessed Mary walks into the ward and meets Death for the first time, who is not a Satan like her incarnate on Earth, but is guided to this place for a common purpose they both share. As Death departs, they go their separate ways. Grace awakens under Arden's care. Though it might be best to let her die and be free, Arden won't allow his name to be tarnished. He strives to save her, to have her reveal the truth. Meanwhile, Lana is still enduring Oliver's torture in the basement. Oliver doesn't kill her, but the daily torment makes Lana wish for death. Walker listens to his lawyer's advice, with all evidence against him. The lawyer believes Walker can't escape judgment unless Oliver admits to faking the recordings. Otherwise, they'll have to resort to old tricks, convincing the court that Walker is mentally ill to lessen his sentence. As the lawyer's voice fades, Walker suddenly lashes out, knocking the lawyer out with a paper cutter. In the basement, Death also comes to Lana, offering comfort and spreading dark wings, ready to claim her soul. Just before the kiss of death, Lana chooses to reject it, fighting for a sliver of hope. Oliver admits that keeping Lana captive was a mistake, not out of conscience, but boredom. His childhood traumas won't be soothed by Lana alone. He craves more killings. Out of past affection, Oliver attempts to anesthetize Lana, who seizes the moment to smash his head with a picture frame. They scuffle onto the floor where Lana strangles him unconscious with a chain. She then escapes upstairs. Oliver tries to follow but is kicked away and crashes into a table. Lana finally escaped the den of evil by catching a ride with a passerby, intending to head to the police station. The driver, instead of refusing, began to talk incessantly. He had just caught his wife in bed with another man, and now all women looked the same to him. To him, Lana was just another girl running away after a quarrel with her boyfriend. Death then appeared in the back seat, and Lana was astonished as to why it kept following her. The driver then ended his life by shooting himself, causing the car to go out of control. Lana passed out, and upon waking, found herself back in that familiar place with the Satan-possessed Mary smiling at her. After enduring so much suffering, she was once again in the devil's hands. Based on the killer's details from the investigator, Sister Jude was about to report to the police when she saw Death, her old acquaintance, in the mirror's reflection. Turning to look at the television, she saw several newspapers that had been posted there, covering the car accident she caused in 1942. Since that accident, Jude had been restless, shutting herself in her room to smoke and drink. The bar manager found the singer Jude and questioned why she had skipped work again. Jude couldn't remember the last time she had gone to perform on the stage. The manager handed her a stack of money, her severance pay for being dismissed. This severed Jude's last hope. She pleaded with the manager to keep her job, even attempting to flirt with him, but the manager found Jude repulsive and left without mercy. Jude drove off to clear her head, drinking and driving aimlessly until her car crashed into a tree at the convent. She looked up at the giant statue of Jesus, feeling moved, but by now she was not saved, only worse off. Clearly, the scene had been set by Mary, causing Jude either to spend her life evading the police or use the razor left by Mary to end her life. She lingered in the restroom, ultimately unable to harm herself. Death was already sitting opposite her, not their first encounter. Jude's life had been so tragic that she had often considered suicide. Death comforted Jude, telling her that she hadn't made any significant mistakes in life, and now she was cast out by the church and charged with murder. Life had been so unfair to Jude that perhaps it was better to choose release. Jude accepted Death's invitation, but she had one last thing to do. She went to the home of the victim girl she hit in the past, where Jude saw the girl's parents seem to have another child after the loss of their daughter. Jude was determined to confess everything to the parents, but they mistook her for their daughter's Sunday school teacher. Jude clarified she was there because of a car accident years ago. Just as she was about to confess her hit and run, the victim girl appeared, alive and well, now a nurse. Jude was confused and confessed to hitting the girl, recounting the incident. But the couple looked at her in surprise. In fact, the girl hadn't died at all, but had only been lightly injured. Although the girl's father had wanted revenge on the hit-and-run driver, the incident was long past, and they bore no grudge against Jude. Inside the asylum, Lana sought out Mary for help, recounting how the blood on her face belonged to someone else and narrating her own harrowing experience. She implored Mary to help her call the police. Mary was already aware of everything since the night she knew all when Oliver was treating the crazy man. She reassured Lana to relax, take her medicine, and promised to fight for her justice. After breaking out of prison, Walker returned to the asylum to keep his promise of running away with Grace. Grace was ecstatic to see her beloved, but as they left, they encountered a monster that had followed them. Walker stabbed the monster in the belly, only for the security head to enter with a gun, forcing him to drop his weapon. Grace couldn't bear the thought of Walker being captured again and bravely stepped in front of the bullet. With no other choice, Walker fled alone. As Grace lay dying, she encountered death once more, and this time, with no regrets, she left with it. In a flashback, a mall Santa was ready to head home on Christmas Eve when a child asked him for some gifts, but he was just an employee of the mall, his work over, returning home without the magic to make the child's wishes come true. A bystander with a pompadour, seeing this, scorned the situation, believing it insulted the reputation of Santa Claus, and thus he shot the mall Santa dead. In 1962, this pompadour man arrived at the home of a little girl, his scarf stained with blood and his beard removed. Yet the young girl still believed him to be the legendary Santa Claus. The man acted gently, telling her that Christmas had come early and that he was there to deliver gifts to her parents. So the girl led him upstairs where he tied up her sleeping parents in the bedroom. He was a Christmas-obsessed maniac, and the couple's panic did not suit the festive atmosphere he desired, so the pompadour man killed them both. The scene returns to the asylum, where Sister Mary is busily preparing for the Christmas festivities. Her approach differs from that of others. She believes that even the frail and ailing patients should enjoy the holiday spirit. To this end, she snips off a lock of hair from each person and adorns the Christmas tree with these strands. She even goes as far as to confiscate a patient's dentures. Dr. Arden, witnessing her actions, is at a loss for words. He turns and retreats to the lab where the security head is in the midst of confession. The security head, having gunned down the defenseless Grace, is racked with guilt. After much contemplation, he decides to turn himself into the police and inform them about the asylum's monsters and the situation with Walker. Seeing the security head's determination, Arden does not try to stop him. Mary, lost in a daze by the fireplace, suddenly feels the cold touch of a razor against her neck. This very razor was the one she had given to Jude for her to end her life. However, Jude has now resolved her inner turmoil, aware of an evil spirit inhabiting Mary. If Jude were to cut her throat, at the very least, Mary's soul could ascend to heaven and find salvation. As Mary's about to use her powers to push Jude away, Arden bursts into the room. Mary quickly reverts to her normal demeanor and summons the guards to remove Jude. As Jude is being led away, she tries to warn the doctor to stay away from Mary, but he does not heed her warning. Watching Jude being taken away, Arden reminds Mary that they are in trouble, not because of Jude, but because of the security head, who has decided to confess to the authorities. Mary, however, does not regard him as a threat. She feels she has everything under control. She brings a gift box to an inmate confined in the depths of the prison, a red Christmas suit. The inmate, Lee, is the exact pompadour man who started a killing spree 2 years ago. After being arrested and sent to Briarcliff, Sister Jude took special care of him. Unlike the other patients, he was deprived of his freedom. During a Christmas Eve photo event, Lee bit a fellow patient in front of the media, resulting in his permanent confinement and the cancellation of the annual Christmas festivities by Jude. Now, Mary brings him the Christmas suit once again, intending to turn him back into the murderous maniac he once was. Dr. Arden knocks on Mary's door. She is leisurely smoking and lounging in her chair. He has come to bring Mary her Christmas Eve gift. Mary unwraps the elegant package to find a dazzling pair of ruby earrings inside. These earrings, once war spoils from a concentration camp, belonged to a lady of high standing within the camp. Persecuted, the woman clung to the hope of returning to her former life and swallowed the earrings to keep them safe, ultimately causing her death. Mary excitedly puts on the earrings, feeling more beautiful than ever. But Arden's disappointment in her is now complete. Mary fails to sense the tainted history of the earrings. The once shy girl nibbling on candy apples no longer exists. Mary threatens Arden. Either he fully supports her, or not even God can save him. Lana had food poisoning and was vomiting non-stop. There was still no reply to the report she had sent to Mary, which made her anxious. During this time, she saw Walker lying in the next bed. Jude arrived at the monastery and requested the Mother Superior to send her back to Briarcliff, claiming she now had no more burdens to bear and wished to return to the asylum to dispel the darkness there. At that moment, the Mother Superior received a phone call. It was Arden who was asking to see Jude. He had previously blamed Mary's transformation on medical reasons, but now, desperate and out of options, he sought Jude's help. Initially, Jude had no respect for this scoundrel. However, her heart was swayed when she heard Arden speak of Mary's past innocence. Jude decided to go back to Briarcliff, not for Arden, but to save Mary. Inside the asylum, the priest was handing out gifts, lavishing praise on Briarcliff under the management of Mary. He even believed that Mary had now completely outshone Jude. Walker was immersed in a blissful dream where his lover shifted from Alma to Grace. With a pregnant Grace, he gently danced to hymns. However, his dream was shattered by Lana, who removed his anesthesia drip and revealed to him that Oliver was the actual murderer. Realizing she could no longer trust Mary, Lana was determined to escape on her own. Meanwhile, Arden sneaked Jude into the asylum and Jude instructed him to bring Mary to the office, confident she could handle her if they were left undisturbed. In the common room, Mary was excitedly presiding over the event. The security head brought in a ladder to place the star given by the priest atop the tree. Suddenly, Lee went mad, knocking down the ladder and then attacking the security head. Luckily, other guards quickly restrained him. After the scuffle, the security head had his men lock Lee back in his cell. In the ensuing chaos, Arden took the opportunity to suggest Mary go to the office to check on things. Meanwhile, Lana had just found a phone and was about to call the police when Oliver suddenly appeared behind her. The security head locked Lee in the cell, but as he turned around, he found Mary standing before him. Mary was certainly not there to reward the security head. She pulled out a razor and precisely severed the security head's artery. Then she opened the cell door, sent Lee into the office, and locked the door. Jude, still praying in the office, didn't understand what was happening, but the madman before her clearly wanted revenge. Arden returned to Mary's side, and she was grateful for his loyalty at a critical moment. Oliver easily infiltrated the asylum. The news in the newspaper had already fully exposed Lana's whereabouts. After Lana left, he also destroyed all the evidence in the house. Now, by killing Lana, the only eyewitness, he could start his fresh life anew. Lana was strangled by Oliver. He wanted to peel off Lana's face to create a new mask. Just in the nick of time, Walker burst in and knocked Oliver unconscious. Lana wanted to finish Oliver off, but Walker stopped her. Oliver was now his only chance to clear his own name. The two of them tied him up and hid him in this little-known storeroom. Before leaving, Lana vowed to bury Oliver with her own hands. In the office, Jude couldn't beat the physically strong Lee. As he was about to pounce and assault her, Jude stabbed the sharp knife into Lee's neck, causing him to roll to the ground, convulsing non-stop. Arden prepared to take Grace to be cremated with a trailer, but halfway there he suddenly suffered a splitting headache and dazzling white light appeared before his eyes. When he regained his sight, Grace had disappeared from the vehicle. The scene fast-forward to show a beardy man who came to the psychologist's clinic. For many years, he had endured the torment of his obsessive-compulsive disorder. Ever since the man first awakened his desires and was kicked out by his adoptive family, things had gotten worse. The female doctor thought he was talking about masturbation, which is common, but the beardy man said he had skinned a dead cat. In the years that followed, he continually abused animals and was locked up in jail. In prison, the beardy man began to ponder where his impulses came from. He found his biological father's house and began to emulate his father's skinning of women. He wasn't as skilled as his father, so he recently considered going to medical school. Facing the shocked doctor, the beardy man revealed his true identity. He was the son of the bloody face Oliver, the result of Lana being raped by Oliver. The scene then shifts back to the asylum where Mary bribed Lana. Lana's same-sex orientation seemed to have been corrected, but at the same time, she also became pregnant. Mary deduced that the child was Oliver's offspring. Lana had no intention of giving birth to this demon's child, but Mary forced her to do so. She assured Lana that once the child was born, it would be sent to an orphanage. With no means to resist, Lana was just about to get up and leave when she fainted to the ground. Jude woke up restrained in patient bindings. Father Howard pronounced her fate before her eyes. Based on Lee's testimony, Jude had become the prime suspect in the security head's murder. The statements from Mary, Arden, and others convinced the judge that Jude was mentally ill. She was sentenced to spend the rest of her life within Briarcliff Asylum. In despair, Jude screamed and shouted at the priest she once had feelings for, but Howard ignored her, only sighing after closing the door. Howard went to his office, where a box of Jude's personal belongings was waiting, especially her red dress. Mary walked in at just the right moment, expressing her commiseration for Jude's downfall. Sitting in the chair, Mary looked up at the priest with innocent eyes. She promised Howard that she would be more loyal than Jude. With a series of maneuvers, Howard had let go of his thoughts on Jude. At this moment, Jude was receiving the same treatment as the other patients. The priest came in to stop the abusive nun and brought someone to Jude. It was Lee. Approaching Jude's bed, Lee looked at her with an exceedingly gentle gaze. He forgave Jude not for stabbing him in the neck, but for her previous prejudices against him. To Jude, Lee's forgiveness was a bitter irony, and the priest was unaware of the true circumstances. Walker, hearing someone approaching, quickly restored the medicine tube to its original state. But the person who arrived was Lana. She once again proposed to Walker to kill Oliver. Walker urged her to calm down, explaining that he knew of a truth serum that, if used on Oliver, could exonerate him. Dr. Arden made his way to the underground tunnel where Grace had once vanished without a trace. Back then, he had been too panicked to do anything but flee. Now, returning to the scene, Arden successfully uncovered some clues, a set of strange monster tracks in the sandy soil in front of the vehicle. Lana entered the storeroom, pushing aside the mattress used as a cover. Oliver was still tied up behind it. After making sure he wouldn't make any noise, she gave him some water. Oliver still harbored thoughts of killing Lana, but his expression changed upon learning he was going to be a father. He pleaded with Lana to give birth to the child, not wanting his child to undergo the same experiences he had. However, Lana made it clear that she would never allow the child to be born alive. Oliver swore to Lana that he would change, which was exactly what Lana wanted to hear. Starting with the first victim, she made Oliver confess his crimes. Going against his usual behavior, Oliver confessed to the murder of 3 women. But when it came to the last one, he told Lana that her lover had never loved her. Lana was indifferent. She had already gotten what she wanted, as Walker had been hiding in the background all along, ready with a tape recorder. Oliver, defeated by the same method used on him, was furious. But Lana delivered another heavy blow. She had removed the child the previous night using a stolen coat hanger, and tomorrow, after the guards checked the knife count, she planned to kill him herself. Walker now had the evidence he needed. All that was left was to figure out a way to leave. He was wrapping the recording tape in a towel and hiding it when Arden followed him, holding the claw print samples collected from the tunnel. Arden invited Walker to his office, looking particularly pleased. He poured Walker a glass of wine. Walker's previous statements weren't unfounded. It turns out Dr. Arden too had seen those strange aliens. Although he hadn't seen the full picture, he was sure Walker had some connection with them. That's why they had taken his wife Alma after each of Walker's sexual encounters. As research subjects of the aliens, they would never allow Walker to be killed. That is to say, if Arden put Walker in mortal danger, the aliens would appear again. Walker bluntly called Arden an evil madman, but to see Alma again, he was willing to cooperate with Arden. The next day, Lana waited silently for the guard to leave as planned. She managed to get her hands on a sharp knife from the kitchen, but as she was about to leave, she ran into the guard returning. Without a word, the guard took the knife from her hands. The Christmas killer Lee was praying in the church with such sincere devotion in his eyes that it moved the priest who had been observing him from behind. Howard unlocked Lee's shackles and dressed him in ceremonial robes. He believed that if he could convert someone like Lee, it would be an achievement that could help him rise in the church. He planned to sing a baptismal hymn for Lee, but he forgot that he was dealing with a madman. As soon as Lee emerged from the water, he pushed Howard into it. Lana's knife was confiscated, but she was not discouraged. Pretending to rest for a while, she took out the coat hanger she had sharpened earlier. After ensuring it could be used as a weapon, she returned to the storeroom only to find that Oliver was gone. Lana panicked. In the corridor, she bumped into Mary and realized that it must have been her doing. Mary touched Lana's stomach, telling her that the removal of the child had not been successful and her child was still alive. Lana sat dazedly in the lounge, smoking. Jude had also been brought to this place, and the other patients were still a bit fearful of her. Jude walked straight up to Lana and asked for a cigarette. In an effort to make amends for past wrongs, she offered to help Lana escape from the asylum. In the operating room, Dr. Arden had prepared a syringe of potassium chloride and another with atropine and adrenaline. The former would stop Walker's heart, and the latter would revive him minutes later. Facing death, Walker was afraid, but he still adjusted his state and lay down on the operating table. Arden swiftly injected the syringe into his heart. Within moments, Walker began to convulse and spasm. Arden timed it to inject the atropine just right. Meanwhile, a dazzling white light appeared at the door as expected, which might indicate an alien incident. Arden hurriedly pushed open the door and ran outside, following the guidance of the light to a room. Inside the room were a retarded patient and a naked, pregnant Grace who was about to give birth. Arden was confused, his mind a complete mess. At this very moment, Howard was enduring immense suffering. He had been crucified by Lee, mimicking Jesus. As he was gasping for breath, death came to his side, ready to claim his soul. The white light did not regard the dying Walker, but fortunately, Arden arrived just in time. He administered atropine and adrenaline to Walker, miraculously bringing him back from the brink of death. Walker, gasping for air, asked Arden about the outcome. Arden told him the experiment had failed. No one had come, but he had secretly placed the retarded patient and Grace in a hidden room, and at this moment, he was preparing to see what exactly Grace was carrying. The retarded patient, seemingly oblivious and commissioned by aliens to protect Grace, had appeared. Arden's plans for X-ray exposure and C-section were thwarted by the retarded patient, who could even flick the scalpel away through the air. He mocked Arden, calling him a low-level doctor whose shoddy medical skills could never compare to their own. Contrary to his previous feeble-minded appearance, the retarded patient's gaze was now sharp and piercing. Previously, the retarded patient had been falsely accused of murder by his brother-in-law, and the judge, after one look at his demeanor, sent him to Briarcliff Asylum. Although it's unclear whether he had been altered by aliens, the retarded patient now possessed formidable strength. Howard, who was nailed to the cross, had not died. He was now sitting in a wheelchair, being cared for by Mary, who helped him to bed and assured him that they would catch the Christmas psycho killer Lee. Compared to Lee, Howard was more worried about the nun before him. Before his near-death experience, death had told him his time was not yet up. He had one more great deed to do, to expel the demon inside his beloved nun. Death warned him that to accomplish this, his will must be resolute, using his rosary to perform the exorcism unnoticed. A new piece of equipment had been added to the lounge. Jude knew it was Mary's way of mocking her. After she had broken the record player, Mary bought a second-hand jukebox and placed it there, excitedly announcing to the patients that Briarcliff Asylum had entered a new era. Jude was not provoked. She simply walked out with a cold gaze. As Walker passed by her, Lana saw her old comrade and couldn't help but embrace him, somewhat drawing the attention of the guards. Just as Walker sat down, Lana shared the news of Oliver's disappearance with him. At that moment, Oliver himself was approaching them. He sat down opposite the two, his steps measured and composed. He had already learned from Mary that the child was safe and would be protected. With no more concerns, Oliver even planned to wait a year after the child's birth before he would kill Lana, so he could claim another year of medical insurance funds. As for Walker's videotape, it seemed he would no longer be able to hand it over, because from now on, Oliver would be a permanent resident of Briarcliff. Jude lay awake in her bed at night, unable to find comfort in any position. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a louder noise. It was time for the rounds. She stepped out of her room and locked eyes with Lana, a memory flashing before her. It was Lana's first night there when she had confronted Mary about why Oliver had been sent to this place. But with a dismissive wave of her hand, the Satan-possessed Mary had locked her in the hydrotherapy room. Mary enjoyed provoking Jude in front of the other patients. She even went so far as to plant a cucumber found in the room to frame Jude. She relished in watching Jude's reputation among the patients diminish. Her goal was to slowly destroy this poor woman. She had Arden administer electroshock therapy to Jude, doubling the voltage to erase her memories faster. Howard's bandages were being removed. His wounds had nearly healed. He ignored Mary's sweet nothings, seizing the opportunity to blindfold her quickly and began to chant. But Mary was quick to catch on. She threw Howard off and straddled him. Howard's mental defenses crumbled. He wanted to resist, but her seductive body left him powerless. Howard had forgotten death's warning and let Mary twist and turn on top of him. This scene was unfortunately witnessed by Arden at the door. Jude, post-electrocution, returned to the lounge disheveled, with a vacant look in her eyes. The other patients couldn't help but snicker at her dispirited appearance. She collapsed on the sofa and then made her way to the jukebox, banging on it like a madwoman, ignoring Lana's questions. In her mind, she was young again, the center of attention in the asylum with patients dancing around her. Even Walker joined in, and she rode the rhythm, pushing the atmosphere to a climax. But as the music stopped, Lana's face was once again before her. Outside, the world was a blanket of ice and snow. Dr. Arden was about to feed the monsters. Mary caught up with him, trying to explain that her flirting with the priest was all just an act. Arden then turned and killed all the creatures he had been feeding. His love for Mary was too deep. He felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. His possessiveness had never been so intense. But Mary was unappreciative. She kicked Arden away and ran off. Howard found Jude and apologized for his previous mistrust of her. Jude told him there was only one way to deal with the situation. They had to kill Mary. Oliver wanted to find Arden. He had already had the guards tie up Walker and bring him to his room. Now, he needed to get a truth serum from Arden. Oliver went to the office, but Arden wasn't there. As Oliver began to search, he heard strange noises. Upon opening the secret door, the retarded patient crawled out from under the operating table. Grace was in labor, and Howard was singing hymns to strengthen his resolve. Mary walked in and sneered at his cowardice. She tried to seduce him into touching her sweet body again, but this time Howard escaped. When seduction failed, the Satan-possessed Mary resorted to bribery, promising to elevate Howard to the rank of bishop or even pope. Howard was indecisive, but soon he followed her outside. He chose to exorcise the demon. Satan, revealed in her true form, grabbed Howard and dragged him to the railing. At that moment, Mary's soul awoke, and she confessed to the priest her desire for redemption. Howard took the opportunity to break free and pushed her off the balcony. Mary fell from the high building with a satisfied smile on her face. Death arrived as promised, and with a gentle kiss on her lips, both souls were taken away. Howard offered the last prayers over the body. Although Arden wanted to blame the priest for killing Mary, he understood that perhaps this was the best outcome. Despite cremation being a pagan practice, Howard advocated for Mary's cremation, as her body was entirely corrupted by the devil and nothing was left but the stench of decay. Meanwhile, Oliver felt confident in his victory and took Walker to see Grace. Although he didn't understand why Grace hadn't died or why she had brought back a child, this was an ideal hostage for Oliver. It didn't take long for Walker to reveal the location of the videotape. Oliver rushed there but found only a book. Lana had already swapped out the tape. She used the child within her as leverage, ensuring Oliver wouldn't dare harm her. The task of cremating the body was given to Arden. He opened the crematorium, but after much thought, he decided to take one last look at Mary. As the white cloth was lifted, Mary's beauty brought tears to Arden's eyes. He lay down beside Mary's body and entered the crematorium with her. Elsewhere, Walker was roused from solitary confinement, momentarily blinded by the brightness of the outside world. The visitor was Oliver, who had come to take Walker out. Contrary to what Walker might have thought, Oliver was very caring towards children. He had vaccinated the child against smallpox. Oliver also wanted to check on Grace's prosthetic breast reaction, but the retarded patient pointed out his ulterior motive and was forcibly taken to a spa room by the guard. Taking advantage of a moment alone with the two of them, Walker finally had the chance to ask Grace about her experiences after her supposed death. Grace told Walker that the aliens were advanced. They had revived her and given her a child. Unfortunately, they weren't perfect. Alma was one of their failed cases. While Walker was somewhat disheartened, having Grace back was enough for him. As their emotions deepened, Walker seized the moment and proposed to Grace, who was more than happy to accept. Just as they kissed, Howard burst in with a group. He wasn't there to witness their marriage. Instead, he introduced the head of an orphanage. It was clear the orphanage intended to take the child away. When the couple resisted, a monk nearby snatched the child. Oliver entered at just the right moment to taunt Walker, but then suggested that they could have an opportunity to collaborate. Lana was still busy in the kitchen when suddenly someone approached her. It was the dean of the asylum, sent by Jude to help Lana escape. She pulled Lana into a secluded corner and handed her a stack of files detailing all the injustices Lana had suffered there, to help her expose the place once she got out. The dean wanted Briarcliff Asylum to crumble to ashes. She informed Lana that a taxi was waiting. As soon as Lana was ready, they could make their escape. Without hesitation, Lana pulled out a tape hidden in the flour. Before leaving, she swore to Jude that she would return to save her. But Jude was already out of it, kneading the dough mindlessly. Oliver had all his plans laid out. As long as Walker handed over the tape, he could let his family go free. And as for the bloody-faced suspect, he could easily pin it on the missing Arden. Lana was already dressed and ready to head downstairs. Walker saw her and decided to provide a distraction. He pulled Oliver aside, pretending to ask for specifics on what to do. Oblivious, Oliver even considered sending Walker to extract information from Lana. Oliver glanced over and saw a familiar figure. Playing it safe, he followed, but it was too late. Lana was already comfortably seated in a taxi. When Oliver spotted her, Lana simply presented the tape and for good measure, flipped him the bird. In the evening, Oliver returned home, disheartened. Lana had been waiting for him at his place for quite some time. She had changed back into the clothes she wore before she was admitted and aimed a gun at Oliver. Lana candidly admitted that she had already handed the tape over to the police and that they would be coming soon to arrest Oliver. But before that, Lana had some questions she needed answers to. Unfazed by her threat, Oliver poured himself a drink and settled down by the fireplace. Lana wanted to know the final whereabouts of her lover. As a homosexual, perhaps Lana felt that only she could provide a dignified funeral for her. Oliver confessed that her lover was the first one whom he had left whole, and after capturing Lana, he used her lover's body as a practice dummy, eventually dismembering her and disposing of the parts across various counties and states. The scene shifts to the storyline of Oliver's grown-up son, whose name is Johnny. He is currently sprawled out on the couch, puffing away in a cloud of smoke. He had set up a meet with a woman, forking out a tidy sum for her company. Just like his killer father, Oliver, Johnny lacked the care of a mother, his twisted nature even more severe than his father's. The prostitute, having been paid, was generous with her affections. Johnny's breathing picked up as he yearned for the comfort he'd been deprived of for far too long. He then turned his face away, lost in the taste of maternal love, yet always feeling something was missing. He thought of his birth mother, Lana, who had never loved him and his father. The more he remembered, the more agitated he became. Despite the prostitute's efforts to comfort him, Johnny overwhelmed her, wanting to strangle the poor substitute in front of him. The scene shifts back to the asylum where Bloody-Face Oliver planned to pour himself another drink. He knew the police would arrive soon, but he was confident he would be fine. This confidence stemmed not only from the gun in the drawer, but also from the likelihood that even if he were arrested, he would probably be sent to a psychiatric hospital, which for him was just another paradise. As the police cars arrived, the flashing blue and red lights danced across their faces. A second before Oliver could grab his gun, Lana shot him dead, thinking that prison would have been too kind for this devil. With her enemy finally gone, Lana went to pay respects at her lover's grave. Although it was just a cenotaph, Lana needed a place to commemorate. Carrying her grief, Lana walked out of the funeral home, where a throng of reporters waited downstairs. Faced with their many questions, Lana simply told them to read her book. Sister Jude had completely lost her mind. She knocked the medicine out of the nuns' hands and cursed at them. Father Howard, after reading the news in the paper, realized it was time to leave this place. He found Jude dancing in front of the jukebox and tried to take her away with him, but Jude ridiculed him mercilessly. Howard's self-preservation scheme seemed juvenile to her, and her disdain for his lust for power was palpable. A few words into their conversation, Howard became infuriated and locked the deranged woman in solitary confinement. Walker, also confined to solitary, received a document. Lana's reporting had done its job. Not only was Walker's name cleared, but now there was a throng of reporters outside clamoring to investigate Briarcliff Asylum. Having learned about the situation, Walker didn't just walk away. He confronted Howard and demanded the release of Grace and the return of her child. Walker first used the threat of media exposure and then reminded him that, in Arden's report, Grace was already listed as deceased. With this two-pronged approach, Howard had no choice but to comply. Walker returned home with Grace and her daughter to their once happy home, now a shell of its former self after the ordeal. As Walker was about to look to the future, he shockingly found Alma, who had been missing for a long time, and her child in his house. Lana, following a friend's recommendation, went to a back-alley clinic to get rid of her child. The sight of instruments only sterilized with boiling water made her uneasy. As they were about to be inserted into her body, flashbacks of her bloody and horrific experiences flooded her mind. Lana ultimately stopped the doctor. She didn't want anyone else to die. Driven by this thought, she went to the police station. Faced with a list of missing persons she provided, the two officers didn't know what she wanted. Lana's request was a thorough investigation of Briarcliff Asylum. One of the patients there had all their incriminating information. A court order for a search was quickly issued. Lana, accompanied by a group of police officers, burst into the bishop's office. However, when they inquired about Jude's whereabouts, Howard, with great sorrow, showed them her death certificate. Lana couldn't believe it. She insisted that Howard had murdered Jude, but with overwhelming evidence presented, the police had no choice but to leave empty-handed. Unknown to Lana, deep within the asylum, Jude was kept in a narrow, solitary cell. 3 years had passed since Walker's arrest, and he had ultimately formed a family with 2 women, Grace and Alma, but tragedy struck that night. Walker shakily removed the axe from Grace's body, his clothes soaked in blood, and slumped onto the couch, dazed. In the flashback, Alma was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen, the children were playing in the living room, and Grace was at the table, engrossed in her exceptional drawings. That night, the aliens she drew came to life on paper. So absorbed was Grace that she didn't hear Alma's words, who advised her to think less about aliens and focus more on the present life, or at the very least, to stop the children from wasting more toilet paper. Walker returned home to a harmonious scene, which delighted him. He was planning to participate in a major parade and wanted to take the children to see it. Alma, noticing Grace showing the kids her alien drawings, reminded Walker to take the children away. That evening, Walker sought intimacy with Alma, but she showed no interest. Alma had noticed Grace's alien obsession and suggested Walker spend more time with her. Reluctantly, Walker went to Grace's room and found she had created a new artwork. It wasn't nostalgia, but reverence for the aliens who had given her and the children a new life, and she wanted to share this with the children to help them understand their origins. Walker and Grace kissed, while Alma listened quietly next door. Suddenly, a white light flared, and Alma, terrified, crouched and cried by the wall until Walker and Grace hurried over. It wasn't aliens this time, just local thugs starting a fire. Walker called the police, but they did not take his report seriously due to his polygamous family situation. The next day, Alma was cooking as usual, and Grace noticed she was angry about the previous day's events. Grace tried to explain but chose the wrong words, infuriating Alma even more. Alma used to be the lady of the house, and now Grace was interfering, worshipping the aliens that terrified her and driving her to the brink of breakdown. As they were about to argue, Walker walked in, sensing the discord and wanting to call a family meeting, but Alma refused. Late at night, Walker, unable to sleep, left Alma's side and went to the living room where he found Grace, also awake. She had an almost insane pursuit of the future, a result of her trying to escape her past, and was glad Walker was still by her side. As she joyfully talked about her hopes for the future, Alma struck her in the back with an axe. Stunned by the sudden incident, Walker rushed to Alma, who explained that she was just afraid Grace would attract those creatures again. Grace was already breathless, and Walker gently kissed her cheek. The scene then shifts to Jude being engrossed in a card game at the asylum, where she had become the queen among patients. Father Howard, who had risen to the position of cardinal overseeing New York, was eager to speak with her and had to coax her away from the game. With his departure, the place was destined to become a haven for vagrants, and Howard, not wanting to leave her to her own devices, promised to take her away someday. The arrival of the homeless was at first of little concern to Jude until she recognized one of their leaders, bearing an eerie resemblance to Death, which left her petrified. Her conversation with her was disjointed, and she couldn't fathom why Death still pursued her, unnoticed by everyone except the retarded patient. As the asylum transformed into a shelter, it began to admit patients with criminal records, including Alma. Jude's days were tormented by the looming specter of death, pushing her to the brink of mental collapse. That night, she dreamt of being kissed by Death and retaliated in a violent frenzy, only to be restrained by guards who revealed she was assaulting not Death, but her plump new roommate. Confined to psychiatric care, Jude was confounded by the doctor's revelation of harsh truths. Her animosity towards each roommate stemmed from seeing them as harbingers of death, having cycled through 5 in 2 months. Refusing to believe, Jude clung to the belief that Father Howard would rescue her out, only to be informed that he had left this world for over 2 years. Devastated beyond words and crying out for the retarded patient's corroboration, she was faced with the truth of the retarded patient's death too. Mute in the wake of this revelation, the doctor assured the now subdued Jude that her treatment would be intensified, promising a path to improvement. Later in 1969, Lana was invited to a symposium to discuss her series of books titled Maniac. Since she had shared and published the stories of the asylum, she had garnered a following. People recognized her as a tenacious hero battling darkness. The audience at the symposium was largely made up of her fans. Lana began to passionately recite excerpts from her book, but was soon interrupted by someone who stood up to challenge the accuracy of her accounts. It was the deceased bloody face Oliver and her lover who accused her of erasing lesbian content from her narrative. Although Lana refuted these claims, just as Oliver had suggested, she had indeed shifted her focus onto fame and profit. Lana suddenly started to speak nonsensically, confusing her fans. The event organizers quickly intervened to smooth things over. Following the talk, Lana briskly signed copies of her books. At that moment, Walker appeared before her, and she was overjoyed, for they had once been comrades in arms. Walker seemed uneasy and asked Lana to join him for a more detailed conversation at a cafe. There, Lana excitedly showed off her current status, boasting about selling the movie rights to Hollywood and planning her next book series featuring the Christmas psycho killer Lee as the protagonist. Walker couldn't fathom why she had changed so much. He had hoped Lana would help bring down Briarcliff Asylum, not become a second-rate celebrity. Walker revealed that he had once returned to the asylum to visit his wife, but Alma soon died at the site. He was acutely aware that both he and Lana were responsible for the grim conditions at the asylum and Alma's death. There, he also found Sister Jude, who had gone mad. Walker pleaded with Lana to take up the mantle of conscience again and expose the plight of the asylum, but Lana clearly had no intention of getting involved any further. She hastily left after the book signing concluded. Fast forward to the present day, Johnny, the heir of Bloody Face, finally found a lead on his mother, Lana. He arrived at an old bookstore which, according to the online listing, still had stock of her book. The shop owner was reluctant to engage with this rough man, but Johnny insisted on seeing the signed book. Reluctantly, the owner handed it over. Holding the book, Johnny felt closer to his mother than ever before. After this, he planned to personally kill Lana with the book in hand. Johnny put on his headphones, which played the tales of Briarcliff Asylum, another of his mother's bestsellers narrated by her. As he listened to the 5th chapter, Stormy Night approaches, Johnny walked through the ruins of the asylum. With the narrator's emotive description in the background, he could almost see his parents in the dilapidated lofts. Oliver approached him down the stairs, resting his hands on his son's shoulders, telling him that it was Lana who had robbed them of their love. It was because of Lana's ruthlessness that Johnny had also turned into a homicidal maniac, and it was Johnny who had killed the Bloody Face imposters and the adventurous couple, Leo and his girlfriend, 4 months prior to their visit to the site. Lana may have aged significantly, but thanks to her talent and ambition, her career has flourished. From publishing houses and television media to government officials, her current life is a far cry from the hardships of her past and is more than satisfactory. Today, another television station is featuring her in a special report. People are curious about the true story behind Bloody Face, a name Lana loathes to even mention. She prefers to talk about exposing Briarcliff Asylum after Walker sought her help, a tale not entirely genuine. In pursuit of a clear conscience and to liberate Jude, Lana simply used her as another stepping stone in her rise to success. Realizing she couldn't work in publishing forever, Lana astutely spotted the burgeoning value of television and transitioned to becoming a live host. Her debut was a revelation of the secrets of Briarcliff Asylum, presenting to Americans a glimpse into an unknown world. They were eager to see the lives of the insane in the asylum, and Lana catered to the public's taste, deliberately mentioning Sister Jude. Of course, Lana had fantasized about saving Jude, imagining that capturing such an act of kindness on camera would have brought her fame. But in truth, she never did. Scouring the filthy asylum, she found mention only of someone named Betty, and the story abruptly ended there. Lana couldn't tell it all at once. She needed a break during the commercial break. An eager staff member handed her a bottle of soda water, which she accepted with a calm, "Thank you." Her exposé on the asylum was a smash hit. For the follow-up story, Lana visited Walker's home, discovering in her records that it was Walker who had adopted Betty. The reunion of former comrades in arms was emotional, and Walker was grateful that Lana had ultimately fulfilled her promise to shut down Briarcliff Asylum. However, when asked about Betty's whereabouts, Walker chose to reveal it only to Lana, sending away the accompanying cameraman. Once alone, Walker opened up. He had visited Sister Jude, now Betty, many times. The conditions at the facility deteriorated by the day. Walker made it a point to visit weekly and eventually succeeded in bringing Jude home. The management at the asylum didn't object. They were short-staffed and happy to have one less patient to worry about. Walker's first task at home was to help Jude overcome her addiction, a long process. Fortunately, the children were willing to interact with her, which gradually helped restore her sanity until she could recall her own identity. Jude had gone through an unhappy period where she only remembered Walker from the early days at the asylum. She treated him and the two children as unruly inmates. Faced with the frenzied Jude, Walker was at a loss, but the children stepped in, taking her hands and walking with her into the woods. After returning from the forest, Jude softened, becoming as tender as a grandmother to the children. However, during a dance with Jude, Walker noticed she was bleeding from her nose uncontrollably. Jude wasn't in pain before she passed away. She called the two children to her side, advising Alma's daughter not to be controlled by men and to value herself, and telling Grace's son not to pursue money at the expense of his character. Walker brought her food, but Jude refused, saying she wasn't alone, that someone had always been with her. Walker didn't know whom she meant, but Lana knew that death had finally paid Jude a visit. Of all the comings and goings over the years, this was the one time Jude truly accepted death peacefully. Back to the present, the female journalist took out her pen and paper ready to ask the first question in the next segment of her interview, which would delve into the most controversial aspect of Lana's life. Lana was not evasive. She knew the question would be about Father Howard. At that time, Howard had been avoiding her for weeks. Despite being a cardinal, he was constantly pursued by the press, a source of great embarrassment for him. Lana decided to gather more information, whether Howard was aware of Dr. Arden's human experiments or if he had played a role in establishing the dark administrative system within Briarcliff Asylum. For reasons perhaps unknown or maybe due to Lana's influence, Howard eventually ended his own life at home, lying in a bathtub filled with blood. Although many in society believed Lana had driven Howard to his death, she herself considered it a choice made out of his troubled conscience. At this point, Lana was determined to reveal a secret she had hidden for 40 years. In her first book, she wrote that her child Johnny died at birth, but the truth was, she had abandoned him. It was not just out of disgust, but also because she knew she could not give him a mother's love. She had regretted abandoning her child and had gone to great lengths to find Johnny in the mid-70s. He was being bullied by other children on the orphanage playground when she approached, chased the bullies away, put glasses on Johnny and caressed his cheek. But to him, she was always a stranger. Since then, she never saw or sought him out again. Lana did not hate children. She was close to Walker's two children and even became their godmother. Walker later married a woman from a cooperative, and his 2 children inherited his educational philosophy. Grace's son became a law professor at Harvard University, and Alma's daughter led as a neurosurgeon. Walker himself was suspected of having late-stage pancreatic cancer at 40, but was not in pain. At the end of his life, he followed a white light and vanished, a mystery to Lana to this day. After the interview, the journalist thought the trip would be nothing new, but didn't expect Lana to reveal so much private information. Once the camera crew left, Lana called out Johnny, who had been hiding behind the door. She had recognized her son from the moment he committed a murder, and his face was etched in her mind. Johnny didn't hide his feelings either. He poured a drink and sprawled on the couch. Since hearing the tape that exposed his father, he found Lana despicable. Johnny pointed a gun at Lana's forehead, but she remained calm, softening her tone. She told Johnny that he was nothing like that monstrous father. The man who once played on the lawn didn't need to follow in his father's missteps. Her calls softened Johnny, but he didn't know what to do. He had killed so many people. Lana told him it was all her fault, then took the gun and killed her son like she had killed Oliver. Looking at the body on the floor, Lana remembered Sister Jude's words when she first visited Briarcliff Asylum for an interview. When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.